Sometimes the cruelest betrayal is not the affair itself, but the moment someone makes you feel invisible in a room you helped build. And tonight, wherever you're listening from, tell me in the comments what your heart would do in Soraya's place, because some silences leave scars louder than screams. The crystal chandeliers of the Beaumont Crown Hotel scattered gold across the marble ballroom as Manhattan's elite drifted beneath them in diamonds, silk, and carefully rehearsed laughter. Outside, Fifth Avenue glimmered beneath a thin veil of October rain, the city pulsing with the cold elegance of old money and sharper secrets. Soraya Lennox stood at the top of the grand staircase in a black obsidian gown that seemed to drink in the light around her. The silk clung to her figure with quiet sophistication, flowing behind her like midnight water with every measured step she took. Heads turned instantly, not because she demanded attention, but because true grace never had to ask for it. Her deep brown skin glowed beneath the chandelier light, luminous against the dark satin, while the emerald earrings she wore, a 10th anniversary gift from her husband, caught flashes of gold with every movement of her head. 11 years beside Callum Vale had taught her how to move through rooms like these. Slow, controlled, untouchable. She could still remember the tiny Brooklyn apartment where it all began. The nights she worked double shifts while Callum built presentations at a folding kitchen table. The cheap takeout containers. The unpaid bills hidden beneath stacks of investor contracts. Back then, love had felt honest, hungry, human, but success had a strange way of editing memories. Tonight, the ballroom smelled of white roses, expensive champagne, and polished ambition. A $50 million charity gala hosted by the Vale Foundation. Their foundation. Or at least, it used to be. Soraya descended the staircase slowly, her satin gloves brushing lightly against the marble railing as cameras turned toward the entrance. But the flashes didn't stay on her for long. They shifted instead toward the man waiting near the center of the ballroom. Callum Vale. 6'3", tailored black tuxedo, silver cufflinks, the face of American financial power. And beside him stood a woman wrapped in liquid gold silk, her hand resting lightly against his arm as though she had always belonged there. Celeste Arden smiled for the cameras with the polished confidence of someone who had already rehearsed victory in the mirror. Soraya felt it then. Not heartbreak. Not yet. Just the strange sensation of entering a story where her role had quietly been rewritten. Across the ballroom, Callum finally looked up. For half a second, something flickered in his steel blue eyes as he saw his wife standing beneath the chandeliers. Admiration perhaps. Regret maybe. But the moment vanished as quickly as it came. The orchestra softened into a slow jazz arrangement, while donors and CEOs gathered closer around the couple at the center of the room. Soraya approached them calmly, the train of her gown whispering across the marble floor. Every step felt precise, elegant, dangerous in its restraint. Then Callum smiled politely toward a group of investors beside him and lifted his champagne glass slightly. Everyone, he said smoothly, his voice carrying with effortless authority. This is Celeste, my companion for the evening. The world did not stop. The music still played. Crystal glasses still clinked softly beneath the chandeliers. But something inside Soraya went completely still. Not wife. Not partner. Not the woman who had spent 11 years building his empire beside him. Companion. The word floated through the ballroom like perfume over something rotten. A few guests exchanged awkward glances. Others pretended not to notice. Manhattan society had always been fluent in public cruelty disguised as sophistication. Celeste's manicured fingers tightened subtly around Callum's arm, while photographers continued snapping pictures beneath the gold lights. Soraya simply stood there, poised and silent, her expression unreadable. And in that breathtaking silence, Callum Vale made the biggest mistake of his life. Soraya did not react immediately. That was what unsettled the room the most. Not anger, not tears, just the terrifying elegance of a woman, refusing to collapse in public. The orchestra continued playing beneath the crystal chandeliers, while waiters floated between marble columns carrying trays of champagne that sparkled like liquid gold beneath the ballroom lights. Around her, conversations resumed in cautious whispers. New York society had mastered the art of pretending not to witness cruelty while memorizing every detail of it. Soraya slowly lifted her champagne glass to her lips, though she did not drink. Her dark eyes rested briefly on Callum's face, searching for something familiar beneath the polished mask of the billionaire the world admired. Once upon a time, those same eyes had looked at her across a tiny apartment kitchen while rain leaked through cracked Brooklyn windows. Back then, Callum Vale owned exactly 2 suits, both slightly too big, both bought on clearance. Soraya could still remember hemming one of them herself because they could not afford tailoring before his first investor meeting. She had worked nights at a boutique accounting firm while finishing graduate school during the day, surviving on cold coffee and 4 hours of sleep because she believed in his dream more fiercely than he did. There had been evenings when the power nearly got shut off, weeks when they split one takeout meal between them to save money for business licenses and legal filings. Yet somehow, those years had felt warmer than the ballroom surrounding her now. She remembered Callum sitting barefoot on their worn hardwood floor at 2 in the morning, papers scattered around him while he whispered numbers under his breath. Exhausted, frustrated, terrified, and she had knelt beside him then, pressing her forehead gently against his shoulder while telling him the same thing over and over. You are going to build something extraordinary. He used to smile when she said that, not the polished smile he wore now for investors and magazine covers. A real one, uneven, human, the kind of smile that belonged to a man still capable of gratitude. But success had changed the texture of his soul slowly enough that neither of them noticed at first. The penthouse came before the distance did. Then the private drivers, the interviews, the charity galas, the assistants who filtered his calls, the carefully curated guest lists. Somewhere between the boardrooms and billion-dollar headlines, Soraya had become less of a partner and more of a symbol. Beautiful, refined, silent, easy to display beside him like another piece of luxury branding. Mrs. Vale, your husband has transformed this city, reporters often told her during interviews. And she would smile gracefully while knowing exactly how many nights he almost quit before she held him together with faith alone. Across the ballroom, Celeste laughed softly at something one of the donors whispered to her. Young, golden, perfectly rehearsed. Soraya watched the woman rest her hand on Callum's arm with effortless ownership, and suddenly she understood something with painful clarity. This had not started tonight. Tonight was simply the first time he stopped hiding it. A waiter approached with fresh champagne flutes, but Soraya gently declined. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her untouched glass as she glanced toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Rain streaked softly against the glass now, blurring the city lights into smears of gold and white. Beautiful things always looked softer from a distance. Up close, they revealed every crack. Then, without warning, Soraya noticed something that made her chest go completely still. Her name card had been removed from the head table. In its place, written in elegant gold script beneath the chandelier light, were 2 simple words. Celeste Arden. For a moment, Soraya thought perhaps there had been some mistake. Some last-minute seating adjustment made by an assistant trying too hard to impress the wrong people. But then she saw the subtle expression on Celeste's face as the woman glanced toward the gold-embossed name card at the center of the head table. Satisfaction. Tiny, controlled, yet unmistakable. The realization settled into Soraya's chest with the cold precision of winter rain against glass. This was intentional. Every detail of tonight had been intentional. The orchestra shifted into a softer arrangement while guests moved toward their assigned tables beneath towering arrangements of white orchids and candlelight. The ballroom glowed with the kind of luxury that made ordinary people believe money could soften cruelty. But Soraya knew better now. Wealth did not erase humiliation. It simply taught people how to deliver it elegantly. One of the board members approached Callum with a booming laugh and a firm handshake. Beautiful event tonight, Callum, the older man said before his eyes briefly landed on Celeste. And you must be the new addition everyone has been whispering about. Soraya saw it then. The hesitation, the discomfort, the silent calculation in the room as powerful people tried to determine whether the marriage of Callum and Soraya Vale was quietly ending in front of them. Callum merely smiled with practiced calm. Celeste has been assisting with foundation operations these past few months. Assisting, companion, carefully chosen words. Words designed to wound without leaving fingerprints. Soraya stood perfectly still beside them while cameras continued flashing across the ballroom like distant lightning. Her reflection caught briefly in the mirrored walls surrounding the dining hall. The black satin gown, the diamond earrings, the posture still impossibly graceful despite the humiliation pressing against her ribs. She looked every bit the billionaire's wife. Except suddenly, she no longer felt like one. A woman from the social committee approached Soraya carefully, her pearls glimmering beneath the chandelier light. "Darling," she whispered with strained politeness, "there seems to have been some confusion with the seating chart. I am sure we can add another chair." Another chair. Soraya almost smiled at the cruelty hidden inside that sentence. 11 years beside Callum Vale, and now they were searching for somewhere to place her. Like an unexpected guest. Like an inconvenience. Before Soraya could respond, Celeste tilted her head gently and spoke in a voice sweet enough to poison champagne. "Oh, I assumed Soraya might prefer one of the quieter tables tonight. The press can be exhausting." Several nearby guests lowered their eyes into their drinks. No one defended her. That was the thing about elite society. Cowardice always wore expensive clothing. Callum adjusted the cuff of his tuxedo slowly, avoiding Soraya's gaze entirely. And that hurt more than anything else. Not because he embarrassed her, but because somewhere deep down, he knew exactly what he was doing. Soraya remembered the first luxury watch she bought him after his company finally turned profitable. He had stared at it like it belonged in a museum instead of on his wrist. "One day," he told her back then, "I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel small again." The memory nearly stole the air from her lungs. Across the ballroom, laughter rose again beneath the chandeliers while servers poured wine worth more than their old monthly rent back in Brooklyn. Everything looked beautiful. That was the tragedy of nights like these. Sometimes the ugliest endings happen beneath the prettiest lights. Then Soraya noticed something else. Her wedding anniversary photo with Callum, the one usually displayed beside the foundation donor wall every year, had quietly been replaced tonight by a massive portrait of Callum and Celeste standing together at a recent charity polo event in Connecticut. And suddenly, for the first time all evening, Soraya understood she was not being erased privately. She was being erased publicly. The ballroom suddenly felt smaller to Soraya, though nearly 500 guests still moved beneath the cathedral ceilings in waves of silk and polished laughter. The air itself seemed heavier now, thick with perfume, candle smoke, and the unbearable pressure of humiliation performed politely. She stood motionless beside the donor wall for another few seconds, staring at the oversized photograph of Callum and Celeste smiling together beneath summer sunlight in Connecticut. They looked effortless in the picture, comfortable, like two people already rehearsing a future the world had not officially been told about yet. Soraya lowered her eyes slowly. Her reflection shimmered faintly across the polished marble floor beneath her heels. 11 years. Reduced to a missing name card and a replaced photograph. Somewhere nearby, crystal glasses clinked, while a reporter laughed too loudly at one of the investors' jokes. The orchestra continued its elegant melody as though nothing sacred had just been shattered in the center of the room. That was the strange thing about heartbreak in wealthy places. It arrived quietly, wearing tuxedos, smiling for cameras. Soraya finally turned away from the ballroom and walked toward the private powder room corridor lined with gold-trimmed mirrors and soft amber lighting. No one stopped her. A few women glanced at her sympathetically before quickly looking away again. Sympathy was dangerous in rooms ruled by status. The marble hallway felt colder the farther she walked from the music. Her satin gown whispered against the floor with every measured step, black silk flowing behind her like a shadow refusing to break apart. Inside the powder room, silence wrapped around her instantly. The room glowed in warm champagne light reflected through enormous mirrors framed in brushed gold. Fresh white orchids sat beside folded hand towels embroidered with the hotel crest. Everything looked impossibly pristine. Soraya approached the mirror slowly and stared at herself. Perfect makeup, perfect posture, perfect control. No tears. That was what surprised her most. After everything that had happened tonight, she still refused to fall apart for him. Her fingers drifted unconsciously toward the emerald earrings resting against her neck. Anniversary gifts. Callum had given them to her 3 years ago during a winter trip to Aspen. He had kissed her forehead beside a fireplace while snow fell outside the lodge windows and whispered, "You are the best thing that ever happened to me." The memory landed in her chest like broken glass wrapped in velvet. Soraya inhaled carefully, steadying herself against the marble counter. She thought heartbreak would feel loud, explosive. Instead, it felt like watching a house collapse silently underwater. Slow, beautiful, final. A soft sound behind her pulled her from her thoughts as two socialites entered the powder room, whispering to each other in hushed excitement. They stopped abruptly when they noticed Soraya standing near the mirror. One woman offered an awkward smile, while the other avoided eye contact entirely. "We were just leaving," she murmured quickly. Soraya nodded politely without speaking. The women disappeared almost immediately, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive perfume and embarrassment. Alone again, Soraya reached for her left hand slowly. The massive oval-cut wedding ring caught the warm chandelier light as she turned it gently against her finger. 11 years of loyalty, sacrifice, belief. For a brief second, she remembered the tiny jewelry store where Callum bought it before his first $1 million. He had been nervous that day. His hands shook while placing the ring on her finger because he was terrified she deserved more than he could give. But she had never wanted more. She only wanted him. Soraya slipped the ring off quietly and placed it beside the marble sink. The diamond flashed once beneath the golden lights before becoming completely still. And somehow, that silence hurt more than betrayal itself. Soraya stared at the wedding ring resting alone on the marble counter for several long seconds, while the warm powder room lights reflected against the diamond in fractured pieces. Strange how something once capable of making her heart race now looked so painfully small. Outside the closed doors, the orchestra swelled into applause as another speech began somewhere inside the ballroom. Life continuing. Money continuing. Performance continuing. She reached for the satin clutch resting beside the sink and slipped it slowly beneath her arm. Then, without touching the ring again, Soraya turned toward the exit. The moment the powder room doors opened, the distant sound of laughter and crystal glasses rushed back around her like cold water. Guests still floated across the ballroom beneath chandeliers dripping in gold light, while photographers crowded near the donor stage waiting for the next public moment worth capturing. Soraya walked through them all with terrifying calm. A few people noticed immediately. The missing emerald ring on her left hand. The silence in her eyes. The unmistakable shift in the atmosphere around her. One reporter lowered his camera instinctively as she passed. Another socialite stopped speaking mid-sentence while watching the black satin train of Soraya's gown glide across the marble floor like midnight smoke. Callum remained near the center of the ballroom, speaking with investors from San Francisco and London. Though his attention drifted the second he noticed Soraya crossing toward the main exit. For the first time all evening, uncertainty flickered across his face. Tiny, brief, but real. Celeste leaned closer to him, whispering something softly against his ear, but Callum barely reacted. His eyes followed only Soraya now. She did not rush. That was what made the moment unforgettable. No dramatic scene. No shattered glass. No screaming accusations beneath chandelier light. Just one woman walking away from humiliation with more dignity than anyone else in the room could afford to buy. The orchestra softened again as Soraya approached the towering ballroom doors framed in polished brass. The massive floral arrangements beside the entrance filled the air with white rose perfume, while rain hammered softly against the windows overlooking Fifth Avenue. Behind her, she finally heard Callum's voice. Soraya, deep, controlled, yet strained in a way she had not heard in years. The room seemed to pause collectively. Soraya stopped walking but did not turn around immediately. The silence stretched between them beneath hundreds of watching eyes. Then slowly, gracefully, she looked back over her shoulder. Callum crossed the marble floor toward her, every inch the billionaire the world admired. Tailored tuxedo. Perfect posture. The polished mask of power still firmly in place. Yet standing there beneath the ballroom lights, he suddenly looked like a man realizing too late that some mistakes could not be negotiated away in boardrooms. "You are leaving?" he asked quietly once he reached her. Soraya studied him carefully. She noticed the faint silver strands beginning to touch his dark hair near his temples. The exhaustion hidden beneath his sharp features. The emptiness behind the confidence. For a second, she remembered the younger version of him who used to wait outside her graduate classes holding cheap coffee and impossible dreams. That man felt impossibly far away now. "I think," Soraya said softly, her voice calm enough to cut glass. You made it very clear tonight that there is no place for me here anymore. Callum exhaled slowly. You are overreacting. The words landed harder than betrayal itself. Not because they were cruel, but because they were careless. Soraya almost smiled then. Not from happiness. From clarity. 11 years together, and he still believed the problem was her response instead of his actions. Somewhere behind them, camera flashes exploded suddenly as guests pretended not to watch the exchange unfolding beside the ballroom doors. Callum lowered his voice further. Please do not make this into something dramatic. Soraya looked at him for a long moment beneath the gold chandelier light. Then her gaze drifted toward Celeste standing near the donor stage wrapped in liquid gold silk and borrowed confidence. Finally, Soraya returned her eyes to her husband one last time. The tragic part, Callum, she said quietly, is that you still believe I am the one creating the embarrassment tonight. And with that, she turned away from him completely. The ballroom doors opened. Cold Manhattan rain air rushed inside. Then Soraya Lennox walked out of the gala, and for the first time in 11 years, Callum Vale stood alone. Rain washed across Manhattan in silver ribbons as Soraya stepped out beneath the towering awning of the Beaumont Crown Hotel. The cold October air brushed against her bare shoulders while flashes from cameras erupted behind her through the ballroom glass. Somewhere inside, the orchestra was still playing. Wealthy donors were still drinking champagne. And Callum Vale was likely still standing beneath chandeliers trying to preserve the illusion that nothing important had just walked out of his life. A Blacktown car pulled toward the curb immediately, the driver hurrying through the rain to open the rear door for her. Mrs. Vale, he said softly. Soraya paused for half a second at the title. Strange how hearing it now felt almost unfamiliar. She slipped into the leather back seat silently while rainwater shimmered across the hotel windows behind her like melting gold. The city lights blurred outside as the car pulled away from Fifth Avenue. Soraya leaned her head lightly against the cool glass, watching Manhattan dissolve into streaks of white, amber, and crimson beneath the storm. Her phone vibrated once inside her satin clutch. Then again. Then continuously. Callum. She did not answer. Another message appeared across the screen moments later. Where are you going? Then another. We need to discuss this privately. Discuss. As though humiliation was a scheduling conflict. Soraya closed the phone quietly and slipped it back into her clutch without responding. The silence inside the car felt strangely peaceful after the performance she had just survived. For years, she had convinced herself that loneliness inside marriage was normal once power and money entered the picture. She had accepted canceled dinners, empty penthouse nights, conversations interrupted by business calls and market reports. She told herself sacrifice was part of loving ambitious men. But tonight stripped away every beautiful excuse she had spent years building around his neglect. The car crossed through Midtown while rain hammered softly against the windows. Times Square glowed in the distance like a restless electric ocean. Tourists still crowded sidewalks beneath umbrellas while steam curled upward from subway grates into the freezing air. New York never stopped moving for heartbreak. Soraya suddenly realized she had nowhere she wanted to go. The penthouse no longer felt like home. Her chest tightened briefly at the thought of returning there tonight. The marble floors. The museum-like silence. Callum's perfectly arranged life waiting upstairs as though emotions could be curated like furniture. Change of plans, Soraya said quietly to the driver. Take me to the Mercer Hotel downtown. Of course, ma'am. The car shifted directions immediately. Soraya stared out the window again, while memories kept arriving without permission. Callum asleep at his desk during the early startup years. Callum dancing with her barefoot in their kitchen after landing his first major investor. Callum crying silently the night his father died while she held him. Together through grief no one else ever saw. She had loved every version of him, even the broken ones. Especially the broken ones. Which somehow made tonight hurt even more. Another vibration echoed from inside her clutch. Then another. Finally, a voicemail notification appeared across the screen. Soraya hesitated before pressing play. Callum's voice filled the quiet back seat immediately, lower now. Less polished. Soraya, please answer your phone. A pause followed. She could hear muffled ballroom noise behind him. Glasses. Music. Movement. You embarrassed me tonight by leaving like that. Soraya closed her eyes slowly. Not because the words shocked her anymore, but because they confirmed something devastating. Even now, he still only understood humiliation when it happened to him. She deleted the voicemail without replying. 20 minutes later, the town car stopped outside the Mercer Hotel beneath soft golden lights glowing against the rain. A bellman rushed forward with an umbrella while Soraya stepped onto the wet sidewalk, black satin brushing softly against the pavement. The lobby smelled of sandalwood, fresh lilies, and polished oak. Quiet, warm, human. Nothing like the cold perfection of the ballroom she had just escaped. At the reception desk, the young concierge looked up and immediately recognized her. His expression shifted with visible concern after seeing the missing ring on her hand and the exhaustion hidden behind her elegant composure. "Welcome back, Mrs." He stopped himself gently. "Miss Lennox, we have your usual suite available if you would like." Soraya offered the faintest smile of gratitude. The elevator carried her upward through silence, while rain crawled slowly down the glass walls overlooking downtown Manhattan. Inside the suite, city lights glowed across dark hardwood floors and soft cream furniture. Soraya removed her heels near the entrance and walked barefoot toward the massive windows overlooking the river. The room was peaceful, still, safe. For the first time all evening, her carefully controlled breathing finally trembled. Not because she regretted leaving, but because somewhere deep inside her heart, she had finally accepted that the man she once built a life around no longer existed anymore. Morning arrived slowly over Manhattan, pale winter lights spilling across the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Mercer suite, while the city below continued moving with indifferent precision. Yellow taxis crawled through rain-slick streets. Steam drifted upward from subway grates. Somewhere far below, sirens echoed faintly between buildings already awake with ambition. Soraya had not slept. She stood barefoot near the windows wearing one of the hotel's cream silk robes, her dark curls falling loosely over her shoulders while a cup of untouched coffee cooled beside her on the table. The television across the suite played silently, flashing images from last night's gala beneath glowing headlines. Callum Vale hosts record-breaking charity event. Power couple no more. Mystery surrounds Soraya Lennox exit. One blurry clip repeated endlessly across entertainment channels and social media. Soraya walking alone through the ballroom in black satin, while hundreds of eyes followed her toward the exit. The internet had already transformed her humiliation into spectacle before sunrise. Yet strangely, she did not feel broken this morning. Exhausted, yes. Hollow in places she could not explain. But beneath the grief, something quieter had begun taking shape overnight. Clarity. Her phone rested face down beside the untouched coffee cup. More than 40 missed calls. Nearly all from Callum. The others from publicists, board members, socialites, and reporters desperate to understand what happened inside the Beaumont ballroom. Soraya ignored every one of them. The city had spent years watching her smile politely beside Callum Vale at galas and charity dinners. They did not deserve access to her pain now. Another notification lit the screen suddenly. This time from Vivian Mercer, founder of Mercer Oraline Wellness, and one of the few women in New York powerful enough to intimidate billionaires without raising her voice. "I saw the gala footage. Come see me today. 11 o'clock. No excuses." Soraya stared at the message for several seconds before exhaling softly. Vivian had always seen through polished appearances faster than most people. Years ago, during a charity retreat in Napa Valley, Vivian once told her something that never fully left her mind. Women like us are taught to survive rooms built by powerful men. But eventually, you must build your own room. At the time, Soraya thought it sounded poetic. This morning, it sounded like instruction. By 11:30, rain had finally stopped over Manhattan, leaving the city washed clean beneath cold silver skies. Soraya arrived at Mercer Oraline's flagship office downtown, wearing a camel wool coat over a fitted black dress, oversized sunglasses shielding her exhaustion from the world outside. The building itself felt nothing like Callum's corporate empire. No cold marble intimidation. No towering portraits of men shaking hands. Instead, warm oak walls, soft lighting, and photographs celebrating women of every shade and age lined the space with quiet confidence. Vivian waited near the private lounge overlooking the Hudson River, elegant as always in a tailored ivory suit and gold cuffs resting against deep brown skin that radiated timeless authority. She did not hug Soraya when she arrived, did not offer pity. Only a long look filled with devastating understanding. Sit, Vivian said gently. Soraya lowered herself into the chair across from her, while sunlight shimmered faintly across the river outside. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Vivian slid a thick leather portfolio slowly across the table. 3 years ago, she said calmly, you pitched me an idea during lunch at the Lowell Hotel. Luxury wellness designed specifically for women too often ignored by the beauty industry. I told you then it was brilliant. Soraya looked down at the portfolio silently. Inside were market reports, branding concepts, investor interest summaries, and handwritten notes in Vivian's sharp, elegant script. You kept this? She asked quietly. Vivian leaned back slightly. I keep everything that matters. The words landed heavily inside Soraya's chest. Because somewhere over the past decade, she had stopped believing her own dreams mattered unless they supported Callum's first. Vivian watched her carefully before speaking. Again, you spent 11 years helping a man build an empire. The question now is whether you finally believe you deserve one of your own. Outside the glass windows, sunlight finally broke fully through the storm clouds hanging over Manhattan. And for the first time since walking out of the ballroom, Soraya felt something inside her begin to rise instead of collapse. 6 months later, Manhattan spoke Soraya Lennox's name differently. Not as someone's wife. Not as a quiet figure standing beside a billionaire in charity photographs. But as the founder of Oriel House, the luxury wellness brand that had become the obsession of women across New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and Atlanta almost overnight. The launch party occupied the rooftop terrace of the Glassmere Museum overlooking Central Park, where candlelight flickered against crystal walls while the skyline burned gold beneath the setting sun. Fashion editors floated between investors and celebrities carrying champagne flutes etched with Oriel's elegant black and gold emblem. Everywhere Soraya looked, she saw women who resembled the younger version of herself. Powerful, intelligent, beautiful, yet too often overlooked inside industries that profited from their insecurities while rarely honoring their existence. Tonight was different. Tonight belonged to them. And at the center of it all stood Soraya in a crimson couture gown that seemed to transform the entire rooftop each time she moved beneath the city lights. The silk draped around her like controlled fire, rich against her deep brown skin, while diamond cuffs shimmered softly at her wrists. Cameras followed her everywhere now. But unlike the gala months ago, no one looked through her anymore. They looked toward her. Miss Lennox, Forbes would love an exclusive interview. Soraya, the investors from California just arrived. Your campaign reached 12 million views in 48 hours. Voices surrounded her from every direction while flashes illuminated the rooftop in silver bursts. Yet through all the attention, Soraya remained calm, grounded, untouchably elegant. Because success no longer felt like performance. It felt like breathing after years underwater. Across the terrace, Vivian Mercer watched proudly beside several board members while jazz music drifted through the warm spring air. Oriel House had officially become one of the fastest-growing luxury wellness brands in the country, and every magazine wanted to understand the woman behind it. But none of them knew the full truth. They saw reinvention. They did not see survival. Near the edge of the rooftop, Soraya paused briefly beside the glass railing overlooking Central Park glowing beneath twilight. For one quiet moment, she allowed herself to remember the woman who walked out of the Beaumont Ballroom months earlier, wearing black satin and heartbreak. She barely recognized her now. You look happy. The deep, familiar voice behind her caused the air around her to still instantly. Soraya turned slowly. Callum Vale stood several feet away in a charcoal suit perfectly tailored as always, though something about him looked undeniably altered beneath the rooftop lights. Thinner perhaps, more tired around the eyes. The effortless confidence that once surrounded him like armor now carried visible cracks beneath its surface. Soraya noticed immediately that he had arrived alone. No Celeste. No polished distraction hanging from his arm. Just him. For several seconds neither of them spoke, while Manhattan shimmered below, like another universe entirely. Then Callum glanced around the rooftop slowly, taking in the cameras, the investors, the women surrounding Soraya with admiration instead of obligation. You build all this, he said quietly, almost to himself. Soraya held his gaze calmly. No, she answered with gentle precision. I remembered who I was before someone convinced me to disappear. The words settled heavily between them, while city lights reflected across the glass walls surrounding the rooftop. And standing there beneath the spring skyline, Callum finally understood the terrifying truth about loss. Sometimes the person you betray does not break. Sometimes they become extraordinary without you. The wind moved softly across the rooftop terrace, carrying the scent of spring rain and white garden roses through the Manhattan night while music drifted quietly behind them. Below, the city glittered endlessly beneath glass towers and rivers of headlights stretching into darkness. Soraya stood beside the railing in crimson silk, luminous beneath the skyline she once watched from the shadows of someone else's success. Callum remained a few feet away, his hands resting in his pockets as though even now he did not know what to do with the weight of regret pressing against his chest. Celeste left 3 months ago, he admitted quietly. Turns out she loved attention more than loyalty. Soraya looked out toward the city instead of at him. The words did not satisfy her. They did not hurt her either. They simply arrived too late to matter. Callum exhaled slowly, the sound almost lost beneath the distant jazz music behind them. I spent so much time building an empire, he said, that I stopped protecting the only person who ever loved me before I had one. Soraya finally turned toward him then. The rooftop lights reflected softly in her dark eyes, calm and unreadable. There was no anger left inside her anymore, only distance. The kind created when love survives disappointment for too long and finally grows tired. You know what the saddest part is? She asked gently. Callum held her gaze without speaking. Soraya's crimson gown moved softly in the wind as she continued. I would have stayed through every hard season of your life, every failure, every loss. But you traded something real for applause from people who will forget your name the second the money disappears. The truth settled between them like winter finally ending. Callum lowered his eyes briefly, unable to argue because somewhere deep down he knew she was right. For years he thought power meant being admired. Standing beside Soraya now, he finally understood that real wealth had once been waiting for him every night inside their home, and he destroyed it with his own hands. A black car arrived downstairs beside the museum entrance. Soraya glanced toward the elevator lobby before looking back at him one last time. Goodbye, Callum. Her voice was soft, final, not cruel, which somehow hurt him more. Then she turned and walked away beneath the golden rooftop lights while Manhattan shimmered around her like a city witnessing rebirth. Callum remained alone beside the glass railing long after she disappeared from sight, staring out at the skyline they once dreamed about together. And for the first time in his life, the billionaire finally understood that some women do not leave because they stopped loving you. They leave because they finally start loving themselves more.